Okay, I'm going to do one of my, what would be traditionally a rant video, but I'm not really as emotionally invested in the game anymore, so it's probably actually going to be a much more balanced take than I usually do. Right now, the community is what I would consider angry, or some people are angry. Let's be real. Some people are angry, some people are not angry. What am I talking about? The latest ascension of gear in Raid Shadow Legends. Now, first and foremost, let me give you where my take is coming from. I used to be heavily into the game, now I'm coming back to the game. At no point in my Raid Shadow Legends career, if you would like to call it that, was I what I would consider a professional player. I have always played the game for entertainment value, both for the people watching my videos and absorbing any content creating, as well as for myself when I'm playing the game. I am not the type of person that can do a very good job distinguishing between my work and personal life at this point. I have tried many times, but it is extremely difficult. I normally kind of crunch them all into one. So normally when you see me doing a take on Raid, what you're seeing is a very real, emotional take on most things, because at the time, I feel very strongly about one opinion or one topic in particular. This video is a little bit more nuanced and balanced, and I kind of wanted to break down where I'm coming at with this Ascension, because there is kind of a lot of drama related around it. So the Ascension currently adds on basically another row onto your gear. You can see I have crit damage, gloves, emerald, HP. This is very, just to cut to the heart of the matter, this is where the drama comes in at. Essentially, you have pieces of gear that have rowed perfect, but now with the Ascension, you have to do an additional row. And while you may have considered this piece that you own to be a piece of Holy Grail, now that there's an Ascension, you have a one-time no whammies for each piece of the gear that you have to actually essentially get lucky on to maintain the fact that it's a perfect piece of gear. What this has done is open up the community to the potential of extreme disappointment every time they row gear. This is different than something, for instance, like soul stones, where you wait until you got a soul stone for a character, and now you can, put the soul stone on the character. That's great. The difference here is you actually have to land the RNG, and you can effectively, quote unquote, ruin pieces of gear by getting bad rows on stuff that otherwise would have been perfect. For instance, like rolling flat HP on a pair of critical damage gloves is probably going to make you disappointed. So what happens is, I have a piece of gear here, I look at this piece of gear before the Ascension, and I think, I like this piece of gear. Obviously, this is just an example. This piece of gear isn't actually that great, okay? I say, oh, I like this piece of gear. Let me ascend it, because I might like it even more. And then it rows something like flat defense or flat HP. Now that person who has done this has something that was a point of pride taken away from them and is now a point of failure every time they see this. This is a very obvious sort of emotional fallacy of when you take something from a person, it hurts them more than when you fail to give them something. You see, the loss of potential isn't felt as much from a person as actually the loss of something they feel they've previously owned, even if mathematically they're the same. In fact, this concept has been used to sell packs in video games for a very long time. If you guys remember, you earned it, now claim it, that is literally that concept put into the game to make money off of you. You have earned something, aka it is yours already, now claim it. And if you don't and it goes away, you have lost what you have earned. This is purposely to get your brain into this cycle that I am explaining in order for you to feel some type of way, in order for you to open up your wallet because of that. This is an extremely well-known video called Let's Go Welling, Tricks for Monetizing Mobile Games for Free with Free-to-Play. This is effectively how to psychologically manipulate people, and he talks about this concept.
Loss aversion. This is people are much more attached to the stuff they have than an equal amount of things that they can gain, which means that if I give you an offer, I'll flip a coin. If it's tails, I'll take 100 euros from you. If it's heads, I'll give you 120 euros. Who would take the bet? No one. No. We need more gain to offset the loss is felt more strongly.
So I think that this pretty much speaks for itself. My belief is that this concept is the entirety of why the reaction that we are getting at the moment is so big in the community. Effectively, what happened is instead of having something where it's like, okay, now there's another star on gear, you can upgrade your gear. Yes, it costs time, money, effort, whatever, but your gear will factually be better afterwards. Now people are feeling what, in my opinion, is loss aversion. Now, there's absolutely no debate, in my mind at least, that in mobile games, you have to move the goalpost. You have to continually push content out there that's harder and harder and more difficult, etc., in order to keep players in the game. Games like Diablo Immortal, for instance, lose a large chunk of their community. Trust me, I would know. I can see all the data on my YouTube channel because people get to the end game and realize it's the same thing over and over and over again. What you actually need is constantly the feeling of progression. But what people are now experiencing is the feeling of regression. They had a 10 out of 10 piece of gear. Now it's debatable that their piece of gear is a 7 out of 10, even though factually that piece of gear is not as, or is even stronger than it used to be. Even if it's crit damage, gloves, the row, flat defense, it's still technically stronger than it used to be. Well, not really, because relative to the new goalpost moving of the new content that will actually require these pieces to be perfectly rolled, etc., people now feel where the goalpost is versus where they are has moved and they've lost some ground, aka we're getting some people in the community that are angry. This is sort of compounded by the fact that if you've been playing for years, you have spent hundreds of hours, potentially thousands of dollars actually farming equipment. And now any of the equipment that you have, in order for it to really be min-maxed, gear that you already had min-maxed, now you have to go spend time, energy, potentially even money, if you're that type of player, to go farm more of these. You got to go to the Sand Devil here. Now we've got to go through and actually start farming these things in order to ascend our gear. This does two things. This number one, makes people have to spend resources they otherwise previously would have not spent, that would have just been spent on getting new pieces of gear that they could have potentially sold for silver, etc. Now to just get what is essentially potions, like from the Magic Heap, but for gear. This is a doubling down of things that people just honestly don't want to do. Considering the new dungeon is fairly difficult, the fact that it shows up in Advanced Quest has been brought into question as potentially a little bit tone deaf for players that don't want to focus on that side of the game. Typically, Raid is actually fairly generous in allowing you to really focus on what you want to focus on. I've been playing on a new account, and I have not really felt pressured to do a bunch of stuff I don't want to do. I just skip the events that I don't want to do. I skip the tournaments I don't want to do, etc. But quests and Advanced Quests, I do absolutely want to and need to do pretty much every day in order to get resources that are, in my opinion, factually required in order to really enjoy the game as free to play. So now a person might wake up and see their Advanced Quest is telling them, go ascend a piece of gear. So they go, they do a dungeon, or maybe they can't even do the dungeon, because to be honest, the dungeon's fairly hard. They get the Ascension, and now they have to go to their gear and actually ascend the gear, and then what could end up happening is like what happened with me last night, where when I got my Ascension, my very first Ascension, I ended up rowing, defense and HP and crit damage gloves, etc. And now they've forced me into a route of potentially being disappointed for that day. When I open a shard, I'm not ruining another character, really. When I open a shard, I have the potential to get something. But now, every day, or to be fair, not every day, but when you do get that quest and you do go do the dungeon, the difficulty of the dungeon and all of that aside, we'll leave that for another video, I am brought into the potential of having that loss aversion feeling, which can be emotionally crushing in a game that you just opened to have a good time with that day. And I also thought this was funny. I've quit so many times, I have multiple welcome back gifts to acquire. When I open this Void Shard, if I don't get the Void Legendary I want, I take the hero, I crunch it into another hero, which I do want, and it makes that other hero stronger. I don't have to look at this rock beast every single day and be reminded of a failure, whereas I probably still have to do that on equipment that I'm using on everybody. And I can't exactly take my equipment that rode poorly and then use it to get more oil or something to row into another piece of equipment. So that itself is fundamentally different between acquiring something and the feeling of losing something. Silver is also, in my opinion, when you're free to play, a little bit annoying to acquire because you have to go farm stuff for fodder, etc. You're selling stuff, and you have to take all this silver to upgrade a piece of equipment to 16. And now when it's 16, you're like, okay, I've just spent millions and millions potentially of silver on this one piece of gear. Now let me ascend it. You ascend it and it rows something bad. And now all of that million silver for you doesn't feel like a good investment. Also, unless you're spending money, when you get a shard, it didn't typically cost you anything to get a shard. Getting a shard is a byproduct of playing the game naturally. You're either going to get in the dungeons, you're going to get from the clan boss, which is free, etc. However, getting equipment and leveling it up would be akin to getting a champion and ranking him up to like 5 or 6 star and then seeing what the champion is. There is a fundamental difference between the RNG of the gear and the RNG of everything else in Raid Shadow Legends. Typically in Raid Shadow Legends, RNG is something that happens. Let me use an example. You're running Dragon, you get gear randomly, and you may get a good piece of gear, you may get a bad piece of gear. And yes, it costs you energy to do that, but either way, you acquire the piece of gear, and if it's something that's not so good, you can roll it into silver and use it for something that will be better down the line. However, this is not the case with Ascension. When you ascend something, it's done, and all of the time, effort, money, whatever you want to call it, you put your heart and soul into getting ready for that Ascension. Now it's one big payoff. So the RNG hits different, if I can use that term for a moment in the video, in this aspect of RNG than any other case, both from the highs and the lows. If you have crit damage and the crit damage, crit rate and the crit rate, etc., that is going to feel amazing, but with great highs come great lows as well. Now, I myself am not surprised at all that it has come to this. Literally years ago at this point, I called it and said, you know what they're going to do in Raid when they start running out of content? Or that's kind of a harsh way to say it, but effectively they need something to put into the game. They're going to add the Marvel Strike Force Red Stars, which is essentially what this is. It gives you a percentage increase. It's actually quite literally the Altar of Souls. I called this like 2 years before it came out. I said, this is the way they're going to go with it, because this game, like it or not, is an RNG slot machine type of game. We all log in to see the one-time no whammies. There is plenty of strategy in the game. There is plenty of fun gameplay. However, this game would not, and I would argue with anyone who would disagree, this game would not be as popular as it is without the really big dopamine hits of the shards. This game is one of the best games I've ever seen in terms of entertainment value from acquiring new heroes. Same thing could be said of gear for sure, rolling the gear, etc. And now it can definitely be said for the Ascension. But now, there's a huge level of potential disappointment that could only previously be matched by pulling like 10 sacred shards in a row during the 2x and getting absolutely nut punched with it. So in my own personal opinion, this has to do with loss aversion and a different kind of RNG in this game as well. So in conclusion, I don't think it's wrong to add more things to the game. I don't think I'm surprised by the fact that we basically got Ascension for gear, and I'm not exactly mad at it either. I just think it's very realistic that the community response that's fairly split that we're seeing is the split between people that are logistically looking at the game and thinking, okay, mathematically, I want to do some strategy, I want to build the clan boss team like that, and they're looking at the strategy side of the game, and then the casual people or the people that are more about the dopamine and the RNG and how good can I get are naturally going to feel more gutted when what their pride point is feels less of a pride point after something that's been added into the game. It feels like something was taken away from you instead of you adding value to a product. Even though technically the gear is better, the feeling of that gear is factually worse.